Dear students, welcome to class, or to this online lecture, I should say. So the issue we deal with this week is the state. You will see the state and its characteristics, its origins, and its critiques are popular topics in comparative politics. The origins of the state um, we have discussed in the text of Tilly, so I will not go at great length about this today. So this is a discussion we're having online. So I'll talk more about the characteristics and try to summarize some of the information found in the book, Essentials of Comparative Politics, and hopefully this will help your understanding of what the state is and what are the main problems associated with it, and find some definitions in terms of, and to differentiate what is a state, a regime, a government, because sometimes we often use interchangeably the state and the government. Scholars often do that, so we'll try to sort of sort out the differences. So the modern state is a form of political organization that is quite, what to say, very dominant today. And its emergence we can trace back to the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, like Tilly explains. But that's for Europe mostly. And then this is a form of political organization that has been exported throughout the world due to colonization. And today, states have become the legitimate way of organizing societies. But at the same time, there's a lot of literature in international relations, for instance, that questions the legitimacy of states because of the importance of transnational relations and transnational private actors that are so powerful that they can undermine the legitimacy and the sovereignty of states. And democracy, as we think of it today, is almost inconceivable without a modern state. Maybe it's a lack of imagination from humans, but it's hard to imagine that we could organize a democracy to have a democratic rule without it. Although there are some political ideologies that support this, for instance, anarchism has thought of what can be something just and fair in democracy without structures such as nation states. So I go through here, this is something you find in the book, Characteristics of the Modern State. These are very straightforward and they're not very problematic, but the reason why I'm mentioning them, so these are the four items that make a state. But every time I ask the questions to students, what are the characteristics of the modern state? They will say flag, army. No, the flag is a symbol of the state, but it's not a characteristic. If you have a flag, it doesn't mean that you're a state, right? I mean, if you have a territory, you're likely to have a state, right? I mean, not always, but we'll see some nuances into that. But a flag doesn't make a state. Yeah, many cities have flags. They're not states. The army is not necessary. There are states that don't have armies, and some states have very weak armies. The Vatican has no army, for instance. Yeah, they are very small states that have no army. So these are things that students often mention that are not part of states. But a state apparatus and bureaucracy, you need some kind of functioning government. Yeah, this is sort of a synonym of government. A nation and a population. Sovereignty that is recognized by your own population and by the rest of the world. Some states exist de facto, but they are not recognized internationally. Yeah, so they have no international sovereignty. They have no sovereignty recognized by others, such as Ossetia, for instance, Abkhazia. These are a couple of examples. You need a territory, of course. Yeah, that goes along with. You have to be sovereign in your own territory. So these are just some kind of short, quick clarifications about what are those characteristics. But again, this can be challenged by a number of actors. Here, this is quite well explained in the book, but at the same time, I always make this important clarification. So, different types of institutions when we talk about states, regime, government. So, the state has the characteristics that I've just mentioned. A regime is the sort of the type of political system that a country will have, that a state will have, right? So, is it a parliamentary democracy? Is it a republic, for instance, a democratic republic, or is it a communist union, yeah, or federation? And then you have a government. The government are basically people who govern. So the state is, yeah, the territory, the laws, the apparatus. The regime is the type of institutions that govern the state, and the governments are the people who govern the state. And a state, so here there's this arrow, lower institutionalization. So the government is has the lowest level of institutionalization. Because the form of government can change more, it can be changed more easily than a regime and then the state. It's pretty hard to change a state. It's possible, but it does not happen very often. So I'll give you an example. Let's take France. France took its actual shape in the late 17th century, yeah, after the Treaty of Westphalia that the book talks about. So France as a state hasn't changed a lot since then, yeah, since 1678 or 48. And then, so this is the state of France, right? But its regime changed often. Yeah, it went from monarchy to a republic, and then restoration of monarchy, and then a republic again, some kind of empire, and then republic again. So its regimes have changed a lot in those 400 years, right? So from monarchy to democracy or some form of republicanism. So now in today's France, we have what they call the Fifth Republic, right? So this is the regime that they're using to govern their state. And then the government. So since the Fifth Republic was adopted, the constitution of the Fifth Republic was adopted, the government has changed, I don't know how many times, dozens, yeah? Maybe even hundreds of times, I don't know. It depends if you count whether it's the president or the parliament, but there were many government changes. So that's the difference between those three different levels of institutionalization. And as you can see, yeah, 1648. In Europe, this is this is what states looked like in 1648. And it's interesting to see that a lot of those borders are still valid. If we take, Ireland is a complicated case because you have Northern Ireland as well. But England, Scotland, Portugal, Spain, France, they look almost exactly the same. Denmark, Dutch Republic, yeah, I guess. Belgium and Germany are more complicated. Switzerland almost looks exactly the same. So these are states that have lasted very long, right, already. And some that have, Russia, but yeah, it was an empire. But yeah, so you see there's a very longevity connected to states. And if we turn to, non-European countries, so the difference between Europe and the rest of the world is that the development of states happened over a very long period of time, right? Over centuries of development of wars and capture of new territories, etc. But if with the European colonization all over the world, yeah, the Europeans colonized every single portion of this planet, they imposed their own political structure to other states. So some scholars have asked if the imposition of this idea of nation states has resulted in the creation of dysfunctional states. And this is exactly what Tilly talks about. He says that some of the states are very hard to govern, or to some of the states from post-colonial states, very hard to govern because the relations between the army or the structure of power are too asymmetrical. Because the new nation states, when they become independent from European powers, they inherited the army. So whereas the army in Europe has developed over a very long period of time, they have, there is always some kind of resistance from the population that has resisted the imposition of power and has created a sort of balance between the society and those who hold the gunfires, gunpower. So this is not the case. Another reason would be that is pretty obvious, but we need to mention it, is that the states were based on very arbitrary, very arbitrary borders, right? So here you have the map of Africa, which almost was entirely colonized except for Ethiopia and Liberia. They got independence in various periods, but mostly started in the 50s and then ending in the 1980s. And you see, so you look at this map, right? So different colonial empires that also led to different political systems that were adopted. Yeah, we'll talk about this later. But this is based on complete, exchange of power between Europeans, right? So this is a map of Africa's ethnic diversity. And as you can see, it doesn't match this map, right? I mean, it just doesn't. It makes no sense. So it doesn't mean that I'm not saying that each of these ethnic groups should have their own country or nation state, but it's just to say that this model imposed to Africa and drawn by colonial powers doesn't really match the reality of the people who lived there prior to colonization. So you can see some of the obvious problems related to border drawing. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of the state. So we have state autonomy versus capacity. I wanted to clarify a few things. Capacity is pretty straightforward. It's the ability of the state to carry out basic functions, providing security and reconciling freedom and equality, which is more or less the definition of politics, right? How do you reconcile freedom and equality? So state capacity is basically you're asking, is the state capable of providing basic functions, which are roads, safety, some form of healthcare, some form of schooling, right? So it's just, is the state capable of doing things for its citizens and ensure the safety of its citizens? Autonomy is a bit, is less straightforward. So it's the ability to exercise power independently of public and international actors. So international actors is easy to understand, right? So there are states that are completely dependent on foreign aid, for instance, and they have very little autonomy in defining their own policies, for instance. If the state is too dependent on international aid, and international aid is often conditional, so a country is being told, you need to, we will give you $1 billion if you adopt this and this policy. So they have limited international autonomy. Internal autonomy can also be problematic. So when we talk about public actors, we're talking about the country's own groups, So a government or a state can be parasited by a mafia, for instance, in the context of Central Asia, by clans, Clans can parasite the state and make it less autonomous. So the state should be sort of in French we call it a monstre froid, a cold monster, that has no emotions, that is not connected to anything, doesn't take interest in this and this group, but often it's not the case, So the state is become hostage of some interest groups, right? Low autonomy, though, is not always problematic. So low autonomy, we will talk about it in a moment, in federations is not necessarily problematic. So Canada and Switzerland, for instance, have limited autonomy. The central governments of those states have limited autonomy because who else has autonomy? The different regions of those states. Yeah, in Canada it's the provinces, in Switzerland are the canton. I don't know how you say that in English. Some form of states. So it's not always problematic. So autonomy is connected to devolution of power, which means is the transfer of power from the center to lower units of governments, states, provinces, or regions. It can provide religious rights to minority groups, for instance. It just provides more autonomy to local communities. And it can be an effective antidote for ethno-political wars of secession, for instance. So if you provide some minorities or some specific groups with some form of autonomy, then they can manage their own education system, for instance, and they'll be happy. So they don't feel that they are imposed policies that are contrary to their values or their ways of life. And here there's a map of two types of regimes that we have that concern the devolution of power. So we have in green the states that are considered federal states. Yeah, so these are states where the central government gives some of its autonomy, gives some of its powers to lower levels of government. And as you can notice, there are few of them, and most of them are what? They're very big. Yeah, the largest countries in the world are federal states, because it's hard to govern a very big state without devoluting some powers, because the regions are too different, right? So California has a set of issues that Delaware doesn't care about. Yeah, so that's why local governments need to have some autonomy to manage their own problems that the federal state can solve always by itself. There are exceptions. China is very big and is not a federation. You could say Kazakhstan is also big, but the difference is that the population is very small. So would it make sense to have a federation? Maybe. Or maybe not. So federalism is a system of government, like I said, in which a territory is controlled by two or more levels of government. So Germany with the Länder, United States with the states, and Mexico is also, United States of Mexico, it's called officially. So I think this is straightforward, but maybe not so clear to you because you live in a unitary state. And there is another variation of that, which is asymmetric federalism, where power is divided unevenly between bodies. So Canada, Spain, and Russia are examples of what is an asymmetric federal state. Canada, for instance, has, 10 provinces and 3 territories. So, and each of those provinces have their own parliaments with their own prime minister. And then you have the federal prime minister, who is currently Justin Trudeau, pretty famous guy, maybe not for the for its competences, but for its looks. But you have, and the power is divided unevenly because Quebec has more competences than the other provinces. And the 3 territories on the top, they also have less power than the provinces, because they're very big, very large in territory, but population is very small. So 10 provinces, 3 territories. They have separate spheres of competences, and most importantly, the provinces have taxation power, so they can tax. So can you imagine if the Shimkent region has its own, has its possibility to impose a tax? Yeah, that sounds a bit strange, but this is what is happening in the United States, in Canada. I will not bore you with that, just to show you that they are very different set of competences between the federal and what the provinces are doing and what the federal state is doing. And they're always, here you see in 2019, provincial prime ministers. Justin Trudeau is not there, but they met, all of them, all together. There's only one woman, sadly. There used to be three, now there's only one. And as Kazakhstani politicians, they also like blue jackets, blue suits. So they meet regularly between themselves to talk against the federal government, probably. Because the federation has a lot of issues. There are some administrative complications for citizens, because your driver's license, for instance, is given by the province and not by the state. So if you move, you need to get a different one, something like that. The minor issues. Bigger issues are constitutional debates over competences, allocation of resources. Some provinces always feel that other provinces, poorer provinces, receive more money, they don't contribute enough, yeah? So there are always some kind of arguments going on between provinces. So it might, to some extent, undermine national unity. In Canada, typically, we talk about Quebec and the ROC, the rest of Canada. And sometimes Quebec is often pointed, they point fingers at Quebec for saying that they receive too much transfer from the federal government. Or it can be other poor provinces, poorer provinces from the east, for instance, which economic activity is not as strong, but there are also a lot less people living there. Devolution gone wrong, so this can be problematic because political entrepreneurs can use the resources of the administrative unit to advance a nationalist cause. Here are very good examples. Quebec has more power and has an independentist party movements. There were 2 referendums for independence in Quebec. Catalonia, yeah, you have heard of this. Quebec was a long time ago. Catalonia, not so long ago, they organized a referendum, was refused by Spain. Catalonia is also an autonomous province of Spain. So you see, Scotland is also, the UK is technically not a federation, but it has a form of devolution of power. Scotland has more autonomy and also organized a referendum for independence. And when you have external support, it's easier to secede, yeah, to declare independence. Ossetia, Abkhazia had the support of Russia. Kosovo had the support of the rest of the world, yeah, and they successfully succeeded. Kosovo is recognized by a lot of countries in the world, their sovereignty, not Ossetia and Abkhazia. Unitary systems, let's talk about your own state now. This is when central and national governments have complete authority over political divisions of administrative units. And I think for you it's easy to understand that because the central government in Kazakhstan, in Nur-Sultan, is the one that lays out most of the policies, and then the policies are decided in the parliament and this approved by the Senate, and then the local governing bodies, they serve as administrative arms of the central government. So the local governing bodies in your case are the akimats. And as I mentioned, most of the states in the world are unitary states. So in Kazakhstan, you have 14 provinces, 3 special municipal districts, Almaty, Astana, Shymkent, and the akims, right, of the regions, of those regions, are appointed by the president. Yeah, this is defined by the constitution. The akims are appointed. Municipal akims are appointed by provincial akims, yeah, of those regions. And as we see in Kazakhstan, there is very frequent rotation to prevent corruption, abuse of power, or just to prevent some akims to become too popular, yeah? So there's a very interesting article in my other class where we read about this. Recently, there were some form of democratization. So there is the maslihat are also local governments, right? And now they are elected directly. So probably you have voted in the last elections, and you could vote as well for local elections and parliamentary ones. And in the 21, those elections, 80% of the seats went to Nur-Sultan. So they aren't, it's just a representative of the central government, not a lot of diversity in terms of party representation. And finally, rural akims are indirectly elected by a member of local maslihats. Um, what are the pros and contras of unitary states? So as you could see, there's unitary state doesn't mean that it's less democratic. Yeah, France is a unitary state. Yeah, so and it's considered a very strong democracy, and those states can actually be more efficient. Yeah, because decisions are taken at the top and then they are distributed, and everybody's happy and fulfills their own duties. Yeah. The clear rules, efficiency and promptness. So there's no discussion of what we should do, why are you doing this, this is my responsibility, not yours, like what happens in federations. It can foster political unity, yeah. So the entire country feels like a whole, yeah, whole, WHOLE, and they are strong. They feel that they belong to only one unit, yeah. Unlike in federations, but at the same time, they can be, there's a risk of absence of local democracy, and likeliness that local interests are not represented. How does the central government in Nur Sultan knows what is happening in Jamboul? Yeah, I mean that's the Hakim's Jamboul Hakim to responsibility to mention and to report. Yeah, what are the issues? But at the same time, because it's so far away, it feels disconnected, right? So you need to have very strong Hakims to be able to represent your interests in Nur Sultan. So there might be sort of a disregard of local interests and risk of and because of that, risks of authoritarian practices. But at the same time, many unitary states are democracies, so it doesn't necessarily mean that. So I will stop here for now. I think it's been long enough, and I hope this clarified a few things from the chapter and the syllabus, and we'll discuss online further the case of the historical formations of state with Tilly.